somewhere.
Anywhere. It's okay. Nobody's here.
Nice. We're good.
All
All
right.
right, we're live.
And here we are for the second episode of Dualistic Unity Social on this Thursday, August 10th. I'm very excited for this because it's been a fun conversation all day long. Anybody who hasn't caught the Dualistic Unity Social before this one, definitely go and check it out. Right now, you can only find it as a YouTube live. It will be released later on today, as will this episode. But then the conversation in between in Patreon was equally good. And it's just interesting because this really always comes down to, I think, simplifying it and watching out for bias, right? And by that, I mean, we were having a conversation about how a lot of times in this conversation about spirituality and unity and all of that, we really have a habit of looking at duality as in terms of like fear and love. And the problem with that is that there's a lot of ideas around the concept of love, especially. Fear is pretty fucking clear. But love we tend to mix up because we confuse love with attachment because we identify. And so that's not really love. That's on the other side of that duality of fear. The love on the other side of that duality of fear is acceptance, right? Attachment and fear go hand in hand. That is not love, right? Acceptance, being able to be alone and not hold on to people, not expect something, not need something, that's love. Love is what remains when you are just being yourself, right? That's why it's so very difficult to find true love, as it were, because most of us aren't being ourselves. So, what I'm saying is that although that duality is often used in conversation, it's so easy to distort. Like, so many times people have said, like, well, if this is all one, why are all these horrors in the world? They don't resonate love. Like, it being one means that it's purely love. It's like what you're talking about is a duality there. You're talking about a preference. You would like things to be pleasant. You would like things to be the way that you consider love to be. But any parent will tell you that love does not mean being liked all the time. Okay? We love our children. We don't give them what they want all the time. We love our children. We don't just tell them what they want to hear all the time. That's not love, right? So it's almost a childish view to think that getting what you want all the time, getting things the way that you want them to be all the time is indicative that the universe is loving you, right? And so rather than split the duality that way, I like to look at just acceptance and resistance, which is not a conceptual thing so much as a momentary response to what you are experiencing from moment to moment to moment. Right? Are you resisting it? Are you resisting or are you accepting? And not are you resisting or accepting what's happening, but are you existing or are you resisting or accepting your response, your responsibility to what's happening? Because it's when we pass responsibility off in our response that the distortion really settles in.
And it's in each and every moment that we have the opportunity to do that. Each and every single moment, the opportunity to think that something we're doing should be something else, think that something happening should be something else. And even talking like it's so funny the narrative of, oh, if everything's unity, then why is there suffering sort of thing. It's like, who the fuck ever said that everything being one thing doesn't include suffering? Like, when did that come into play? The whole narrative of, oh, God is love. Says fucking who? Like, in what world? Like, who's to say that God isn't hate? Who's to say that God isn't just hate? Who's to say that unity isn't just hate? That's an equally absurd statement, right? It's just an assumption based on what makes me feel good or bad. You know, it's just that, like, whoever said there's this preferential side to recognizing that everything is one, everything is what is. Like, oh no, it's love. If you're not exuding love, you're not being unifying. It's like it's already unified. There's nothing you can do to make it more or less unified. It's just about you seeing that, be in that. And it's not even about seeing it because the way you see it isn't what it is. It's just, I can't say anything that's gonna say it's just do this, it's just about
Be.
this. It's just you. Just be. Exactly. You're already doing it. You're already acting it out. Just keep being, and you don't have to be so concerned about where it's going because you can't be sure and you can't know what it means anyway. So it's just about recognizing the things that you're holding on to aren't as necessary to hold on to, and even that, it's not the right way. It's just an option. There's just more options than you think in each and every moment. You don't have to be as concerned as you've always been about whatever it is you're doing. It's just an option. There's just more options to consider. That's all that it is. It's not that one is right or one is wrong. They're just out there, and that's all we're ever reminding myself of.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. I wanted to take a quick moment here and say thank you to everyone who's joining us for this second episode of Dualistic Unity Social today. We are in the midst of expanding the Dualistic Unity podcast and community and all of that. We're opening up new opportunities to create more resources for the community so we can get more involved, create more ripples, facilitate more conversations, as it were, including helping to facilitate some in-person groups that are starting to form around the world in various different locations, thanks to our very committed and engaged audience. We appreciate all of you. But if you could help us out, we'd very much appreciate it. Right now, we have a questionnaire. We are trying to get to know who is listening to the podcast so that way we can tell potential advertisers who it is that they would be advertising with. And now I want to preface this by saying that we really are very picky about advertisers. We're looking for products or services or something along those lines where it doesn't imply that you need it, that it is simply something that you can use to add to your experience, and that you are already whole and complete. You don't need the fucking thing. You don't need it. And so that's the kind of advertiser that we're looking for. So do keep that in mind as you fill out this form. We just kind of want to know who it is that they'd be introducing their product to. We don't want to introduce products that don't fit the audience, as it were. So if you can, there is a form on the screen here. You can just select the QR code with your phone, and it will take you to a questionnaire, which you can fill out in just a few minutes. It doesn't take very long. It asks very few questions. They're all very general, but it kind of gives us a hand in creating some literature that we can present to potential people who can help finance some of the endeavors that Dualistic Unity will be up to in the near future.
Yeah, no expectation whatsoever, but appreciate any help as always. It goes a long way, even, a couple minutes to getting to know some of those things. But yeah, the growth has been really cool to see. It's been awesome. The podcast is really picking up, more brand interest, more advertiser interest, a lot of cool guests coming on, a lot of cool conversations, and yeah, it's definitely starting to be felt. And not the least of which being, yeah, retreats coming up. We got that one potentially in Vancouver in October 5th through 9th in Vancouver, a little bit outside of downtown in the city where, yeah, it's just beautiful out there. Lots of cool hikes, lots of cool, fun things to do, and a beautiful house and lodge. And so we were waiting to confirm that until we get some feedback from people who are interested, just so we can gauge some of that interest. So if you are interested in joining us for a retreat, that's not the full 9 days, but it is, four full days with us that feel like a very, very long time. So if you got, a couple days on a holiday, a couple extra days off for work, we would love for you to join us in October. Be a blast.
Yeah, it really is. And the reason that it's so very important, in my opinion, is just because it's so easy to take the conversation that we're having and actually start to think that the two of us, Ray and Andrew, uh, this is all we do. That because we're having relatively deep conversations for the most part on the podcast, that's what this is all about. And I'd like to tell everyone right now that it is not the case. The reason that it's valuable to come to a retreat with us is to realize that none of the idea you have about us as people is correct. None of it. You know, we do goofy shit. We laugh. We act like human beings. We have our insecurities. We have all that, and we're really grateful to do so because it's what allows us to learn more about empathy, about alignment with what you're doing, with what you're experiencing. And so these retreats really are a great chance for everybody to connect on a more equal level, because it's very difficult to look up to somebody who is just avidly rolling a joint and puffing away on this massive cannon, not taking anything seriously. You really lose that enlightened monk kind of idea of them. And that's so important. It's so important. I can't stress this enough. So if you can join us in Vancouver, it's going to be awesome. There's a pool table, there's a hot tub. Vancouver's beautiful in this time of year. We're just going into the fall. There's an indoor fireplace at this one place that we were looking at. So it really just depends on you. And of course, all your food is covered, not just your food, but we also cover all the weed and other substances and whatnot. You know, there is some red wine. We don't encourage drinking by any means, but we do offer red wine with dinner. And aside from that, it's really just an opportunity to sit with Andrew and I and ask any questions that you want to. You know, it's funny because occasionally people will book a one-on-one session with Andrew and me, and they'll pay for that hour. But frankly, I mean, it's over Zoom. If you can sit with us for a couple of hours, I mean, that's so much more because you can actually be in that space with us. You can feel our presence with you, and we can feel yours. And in that, there is more communication. So if you can join us in Vancouver, we would love to see you. And if not, then there is always the Netherlands. And I am stoked about the Netherlands. 2 people bought a ticket today. Very excited about that. There are a bunch of semi-private rooms left, though, and each semi-private room has its own bathroom. This is important to note because I love that. It's very difficult to have a building full of 40 people and like 5 or 6 bathrooms. It sounds like its own special kind of hell. So rather than that, we got this incredible lodge. It's near the German border. It's in the Netherlands. Food is all covered. Everything else, as I said, there's a wood-fired hot tub, which looks dope. And we're going to be hanging out, going for walks on this beautiful estate in the Netherlands. I can't recommend that you join us enough. This is our biggest community event. We're going to have 34 guests, not including Andrew and myself. And then, of course, we have the chef and the assistant, and my daughter will be there. It's just going to be incredible.
Oh yeah, it's gonna be a blast. And yeah, in regards to that's something I've been kind of realizing too, in regards to ideas and ideas of ourselves and ideas we hold on to, and how, if a shift in people's perspective of things is, you know, not going to say the right way to do things or the a better thing to do or anything, but it's an option. It's one of those things that exist in potential. And what's the best way to shift that, to not be what they think you are, to not be the thing that they think you are? And you can't know what they think you are necessarily, but you know that you being you, free in yourself and relaxed, isn't going to be what they think. So you might as well be that. And through being that, it's not going to match with their perspective. And so it's going to allow them to see, oh, if that's not true about them, then maybe my perspective of myself isn't true about me. And so it's just being that. It's being that walking contradiction of what you think I am, whatever that is. And the beauty is that anything that we do contradicts that. Like, we don't even have to do anything specific, like try and figure out what their idea of you is and then be the opposite. It's like, no, just you being you, you fully and wholeheartedly being yourself is inevitably going to shift their idea, because their idea isn't going to be that. And so you fully being that is the easiest thing for you to do and the most impactful thing for them to see, regardless of how you act. So you can't do it incorrectly, because everyone's going to hold on to their own perspective based on their own, perception of themselves, what they want to see, what they need to see, what they feel like they should be seeing, whatever it is. So it's always going to be contradictory. And so you're already doing it no matter what is happening as the environments shift and change as you interact with more people and keep being things. And there's like I don't know, an inevitable shift, but maybe it's more of a shift the more willing you are to recognize it in yourself, how uncertain those things are that you're holding on to and what you think you should be. Or maybe it's just always equally happening and I'm just trying to figure out and measure it in some way, shape, or form.
It's all we're ever doing, right? Just trying to figure out everything instead of just being. But admittedly, we'd have a pretty boring podcast if we were just sitting here being. I think we'd just be sitting here enjoying ourselves, giggling from time to time. But honestly, that's kind of what we do anyway. I mean, I guess this is the thing, and I really worked at this for a long time because, as you can see, trying to get a point across, trying to get somewhere, trying to teach somebody something, it all comes from a certain place that lacks and comes from a certain point of fear and need for control and all of that. And so, these conversations to me are really just about the conversation. Love having this conversation to any variation that I can. And I mean that. I genuinely mean that it comes down to any variation. Like if I'm talking to somebody who's Christian and sure they may not want to discuss God or question any of that stuff, but let's just say they're experiencing anxiety. You know, they're going through a little bit of worry about an upcoming event or you know, a job promotion, stuff like that, or they just say like, oh God, the weather always bums me out, like something like that. Immediately I'm like, hey, this is an opportunity for us to have a conversation about what? Acceptance and resistance, right? And the drag that goes with that resistance, as well as, you know, the benefit of acceptance in terms of responsibility, in terms of being able to relax, knowing that you can only do so much, you know, that you can't actually be in control, but you can feel more alignment, all of that. It's all just an opportunity to have that conversation. And so after you start thinking that the conversation is the deep end of it, when you start realizing that really the conversation is always just about the same thing, you can be yourself. You can relax. You can let go. Right? That's the conversation at the end of the day, right? But there's so many different variations and layers and scales to that and everything else. But the important part is you can let go. You can have faith in yourself. You don't need to hold on. You know, and so for me, this podcast has always just been an opportunity to have that conversation with somebody else. But what's rare about this experience for me is Andrew, right? Because Andrew is willing to continue to have the conversation. And as many people get uncomfortable and they'll go, nah, you know what? I don't want to question that. You know, they'll get uncomfortable. They'll lash out. They'll avoid you. They'll do all kinds of weird shit. They'll vilify you, right? But that's the point, is that to me, this is just an opportunity to have a conversation with a variation of reality with a person who is willing to keep having it. It's not about trying to get somewhere. I dig the conversation. And it's not about trying to get anybody else anywhere. It's about enjoying the conversation. If I'm trying to get anyone anywhere, it's where they are. So mission accomplished. And while you're there, if you want to hang out, shoot the breeze with us, kind of laugh about some things and look at the world in a way that's interesting and doesn't feel oppressive, then that's an option, but I don't need you to do it. Right? I don't think there's anything wrong with what you're doing. The question is, what do you think about what you're doing? And if you're tired of the consequence, then hell, let's have that conversation. If you want to. I don't care. I'm good.
Yeah, well said. Yeah, it's always oh god, it's like not getting anyone anywhere. We're just chilling here talking because you're already like knowing that you're already in the spot that you are. And it is that acceptance versus resistance of just being where you're at. Can you accept that or are you going to fight it, which doesn't actually change where you're at? Like there's a weight that's almost lifted when you let go of the certainty that you should be somewhere other than where you are. And we like to think that thinking that things should be different is what causes them to change. But really it's our resistance to things as they are that causes them to stagnate. It's entirely the opposite of what we think. Like I have to think there's something wrong with this situation in order to make it change, in order to make it shift. It's like the situation is always shifting. It's always changing. And your idea of it that you're maintaining through your resistance to it is what's keeping it how it is what's maintaining that situation, or at least, creating a friction that maintains that situation, the certainty that you should be going through something else, because without that, you're just where you're at. And then the changes are allowed to be seen. It's like a veil is lifted in a sense when you let go of the certainty that you should be somewhere else, that you should be going through something else, you should be feeling something else. It's like the whole landscape shifts when you realize that you don't know where you should or shouldn't be. It's like a total change in perspective, but we're so unwilling to even let go of that certainty that we don't see that side, like see that perspective, because we couldn't fathom not knowing or letting go even for a moment. And even when we do, then, you know, and we get a glimpse, like we were talking about earlier, we get a glimpse and then we judge ourselves for not having gotten a glimpse earlier, and we're back in it and it's back under the water because we start judging ourselves for having a perspective of, quote unquote, it, which isn't it, because it's not what you think it is. So even your idea of clarity as you go through it, it's the conceptualizing of clarity that's getting in the way as well, making you think that you're not still it right now. Oh, I got to get back to that. Oh, how did I not see that for so long? It's like you were always seeing it. You were always seeing it. You're still seeing it. You're seeing it, being it, doing it right now. And it's always just your idea that you're not, that your idea that you should be doing something else that gets in the way, that blocks you from the clarity, whatever it is, the lack of as much stress or tension that comes with realizing that you don't know where you should or shouldn't be and can't possibly know it. So you might as well just be it because it's all you can do anyway.
But you see, then we're left with basically where I am. And you can think about it in however you'd like to, but this is why people don't like sitting still. This is why people like having distractions, is because you're left with your relationship with here and now. And we're so addicted to thinking we need to get somewhere or that we need to get away from something that being left here and now kind of makes us edgy. We start thinking like, oh God, what's going to happen? And it's just us desperately trying to get away from whatever's happening, which is total uncertainty. Right. And that's kind of the thing. It's really funny when it comes down to it. But that's it. A lot of what we do, a lot of our drives, a lot of our distractions, our addictions, our attachments are all just a way of avoiding sitting still with yourself. Right? Because it's uncomfortable. That's why COVID had such a massive impact. It's the reason this conversation suddenly ballooned, in my opinion, is because a lot of people were suddenly left at home with themselves with a great deal less distractions. And although it was uncomfortable, and it was, as it always is when you haven't been doing it, there were also a lot of insights. There was a lot of recognitions of, oh my God, I've been doing that. Holy shit, why have I been doing that? Wow, I've really been needing people's attention. And why? Because all of a sudden the option to get that attention through manipulation or through pandering was gone. It was gone. So all of a sudden you're left with the hole and no way to just quickly fill it temporarily. And so you're like, why the fuck is that hole there? Right? Because it's optional. Right? But that's the thing, is that in the moment, in the silence, is that discomfort. And the discomfort is indicative of your relationship with yourself.
Mm. It's so man, the whole COVID thing is very interesting and just so indicative of not knowing, what's best. Obviously, I'm not downplaying, the impacts and everything of that, but with everything, there's opportunity. And when things like that come around and shake us as well as shift our environment to that, as you were saying, to a situation where you're left just with yourself, there isn't so much of that routine. Yeah, it's like COVID shifted everyone's routine. Everyone's routine got a shaking. No one, like, there were people probably before COVID who were in a 40-year routine, right? Every single week, every single day, every single year. same thing over and over and over and over, and they would have kept that way for the rest of their life. And people were on routines and in and out of routines on so many varying degrees, and there was like a overhaul shift. Like everyone's routine was shaken, and so there was the opportunity to look at things a little bit differently in the uncertainty that was mulling around. It's like COVID was such an expression of uncertainty. Like no one, when it started happening, we didn't know. And oh my God, it was how quick could we know what is happening? And we still didn't know what was happening, but we just were like, I'm pretty sure this is definitely what's happening. I'm going to go with this. And we just did that. Like we saw it on such a grand scale. Holy shit. That desire to know what it is and then treat it and then deal with it and then handle it despite the whole time not knowing. And so you look back at some of the early response, some of the early stuff like, it's got to be this, we got to do this, we got to respond this way. It's like, we don't know that. And then we're seeing secondary, tertiary implications of some of those rash decisions in which we convinced ourselves that we knew when we didn't. And so in that shaking, there's a lot of shifts that happen. People's lives changed a lot. There was a lot more, we saw it with content, with social media. A lot of people, I think, were holding themselves back from it, myself certainly included. And then things shifted, things changed, and any perspective has the opportunity to change things, to shift things. And so as we go through, like, it's just that opportunity, but we always have that opportunity to let go of our certainty, of our false certainty. And sometimes it's just that our environment changes so much that we don't have an option even to hold on to the old certainty. And depending on your mentality, you either sprint back to false certainty, come up with something, come up on some stance about it, or you're willing to remain uncertain. And that's basically where fucking freedom and clarity and all that shit lies, is just the willingness to be uncertain moment to moment to moment to moment, not just on a grand scale of when crazy things happen throughout the world or in reality, but in the moment right now. You don't know with absolute certainty if what you're thinking is the truth, and you never do, and it's always right there, and we just convince ourselves that we do know something that we can't.
And it's so important to recognize that the same mentality is what staves off corrupt governments, right? Like we make assumptions based on our need to feel comfortable, and large structures of power will take advantage of that. They will rely on the fact that we want to perceive them in a certain way, that we won't question them to a certain degree because it would threaten our very sense of comfort. So our over reliance on a sense of comfort is what makes us such perfect targets for corrupt, power hungry politicians who want to do things behind closed doors and not tell us about it, because we're just like, yeah, no, they must be doing good work. They're politicians. We voted for them. I mean, they're civil servants, don't you know? And it's just all the concepts in our head that make us feel like the system is operating as it should, in our opinion. Right. And because the alternative is terrifying. And the only reason it's terrifying is because we are not practicing living in a state of responsible uncertainty. We want to be lulled to sleep. We want to be told a bedtime story that makes us feel comfortable in going out and buying shit we don't need. We want to be able to go and satisfy all of our petty little indulgences without having to worry that there's a consequence for doing so, that somebody is in fact sneaking up behind us, to rob us, when in fact they never left behind us. They've been robbing us for fucking hundreds of years.
Yeah, it's, oh man, it's gnarly to think that, like, with a governmental structure, a power, people in power, or something we look to, it's like they're equally as uncertain as you are about what's to come, about what's happening right now. It's like they're just doing their best to make it seem like they do know. Like, I wonder if it's even a desire to know, or if it's just the desire to make us think that they do.
That's the shell game, right? Like that's the whole point. Is that how many times have you heard like, the elite, they've got all the power, the Illuminati, the Freemasons, all that. It's like anybody who knows anything about running any large organization knows that it is impossible to know what everybody's doing. It's impossible to have that much control over any organization. And the bigger the organization, the less control you have. It's just this liquid, squiddy thing. Like it's not possible in the way that we tend to think it is. But people will think that way. And if I were in that position, I'd want them to. I would want them to think to themselves that I have all the power. So that way they're not trying to do anything to change the status quo. I want them to feel disempowered. Right. And so I benefit from that illusion. And so, yeah, it's sadly something that works against us. Whereas again, recognizing that the power in your life has always been here and now in how you respond to everything. And although that may not be true in a lot of ways because of a generational trend, like in terms of being dependent on electricity, dependent on water, dependent on all of these other services that are provided by the system. Well, that was because of an ongoing lack of responsibility because it got built into the system. Whereas, people in a different state of mind as this system was being built, and they're like, oh, we're going to centralize all of the power under one place, and then we're going to make sure that everybody has to use that, would go, well, hold up. Isn't there a way that we can kind of do this ourselves? Right? But we don't do that because we want to be taken care of at the end of the day. And the whole point is that that's how children look at the world.
Yeah, and that desire to be taken care of, like, seeing that as just everything is symbolic of that, and, like, we worship those we think are taking care of us. Like, we worship those that we're passing responsibility to, and so if we think that it's all in God's hands and not in mine, I'm gonna worship God. If I think, my country is a thing protecting me and not, me here now having sensitivity to my environment, whatever it may be, I'm gonna worship my country. I was looking earlier today down this street I'm on and just saw like a bunch of American flags and just was thinking about it symbolically as a desire to feel a part of something, feel protected by something. And I pledge my allegiance to that. And it's like you're pledging your idea of yourself. It's like you're investing a chunk of what you are into that. And every perception we buy into as truth is like an investment into something that isn't us, like something that isn't me. Like they're all subtle little investments in certainty and control that then builds, but it's all through me. Like it's all stemming from me. Like I have to do it as long as I'm maintaining the certainty about myself as something separate. Then I need to think of things in certain ways. I need to maintain ideas because I'm just me separate from everything. And so I need control of ideas. If I recognize that I'm not what I think I am ever, like never am that, then there isn't so much need for, the external control or giving your allegiance or identifying as something as a means of protecting yourself because there isn't anything to protect anymore. We're just protecting the idea of ourself from ourself as ourself to ourself. Like it's always an interaction with ourself, protecting ourself from it just so we can maintain a story. Like just and we have to hold on to false certainty in order to maintain any degree of a story. And as that more and more starts coming out, more and more evidence of that not being the case, it gets harder and harder and harder to keep that at bay, to keep maintaining that story. And that's where, cognitive dissonance comes in. It's really hard to maintain this whole fucking crazy everything going on without hearing something and filtering it out, like in one ear, out the other. It's like, oh no, I like cognitive dissonance is necessary in order to keep certain recognitions at bay. And that's why we see it come up, and yet we're seeing the consequences. And so the more and more we're able to connect and communicate, the harder and harder it's going to be to keep those ideas as maintained as well as we have for a while.
Well said. Well said. It's interesting you say pledge allegiance. We really are pledging allegiance to a mentality, a way of looking at the world and ourselves, right? Like as soon as we pledge allegiance to a country, for example, we're really pledging allegiance to the perspective of that country being awesome, being the best possible country you could live in, and a lot of other things that kind of get implied along with that. But we also end up changing our perspective of our own empowerment. And what I mean is, how many times have you heard, well, I have the right to free speech because I'm an American, right? Actually, you have the right to free speech because you can speak. And the argument immediately there is, well, not every country offers the right to free speech. Well, it's true. And the American colonies came from that kind of government and got so fucking tired of it that they kept speaking. And then when they were told to shut up, they were like, well, let's fucking fight about it. And they fought for the right to free speech. And that's how things happen. You don't have a government provided right. You have the right because you can fight for it. Okay? And when enough people fight for it, then all of a sudden the government's just like, well, shit, we got to tell them we gave them that right. And it's totally disempowering because it's a right by virtue of our existence. That's the point, right? But we disempower ourselves thinking like, oh, I'm American. That's why I have these freedoms. It's like, no. And the fact that you think so is limiting your freedoms. It's limiting the way you see yourself and the world. It's limiting everything. To see yourself as the root of your rights means that you have a different perspective of everybody and a different respect for their existence as well. And it changes things.
Yeah. Oh man. Yeah, the idea just that fuck, hold on. Uh, yeah, I totally forgot where I was gonna go with that, but yeah, the perspective, fuck, what was the last thing you said?
We were talking about rights, about the fact that they're not
Yeah.
granted
Oh,
to us,
exactly. It's
specifically not God given. Let's get that shit out of the way.
Yeah, like, it's based on our capabilities, like, what we're capable of doing, and even in a country where we say, like, "Oh, you don't have free speech," like, technically you do, there's just been consequences created because there was a certainty that was settled upon that meant that that was the best thing to in some variation. Obviously, from a lot of people's perspectives, like, not having free speech doesn't seem like the best option, but someone along the line thought that it would be better if there wasn't free speech. And so it was a certainty. It was settled upon collectively to some degree, whether it's one person deciding and them deciding to be in power, one person taking it by force and, there not being enough in the way for them to just do that, but there's still the buy-in on some degree, and it's just that it gets beaten out of us, the fight, and that's why violence and fear and all of that have been so impactful over the years is oftentimes when there wasn't an ability to reason or your perspective didn't really make much sense, you just wanted certainty about it, like it was because you couldn't logically explain it or say it, it's like violence ensued, and we see it even on, like, a micro versus macro level. If someone can, has a very short fuse and they get embarrassed about something, or they say something and it's contradicted and they don't have a logical response to it, you see people respond with violence. They just get angry. It's like a boil up and then a visceral response to that. And so we see it on the macro, like as below, so above. And we see it when we can't quite, you know, say something with much certainty at all, like the Spanish Inquisition and all of that. It was like a collective, yeah, we can't prove this, so we're just gonna kill you if you tell us we're wrong. And then they just did that. And then they just did that all over the place until that belief was so beaten into us that it's like we don't even necessarily know why we're still holding on to it, but it's like this collective fear of it that's been because it's never not been you both doing it and getting it done too. So there's ripples that stem from that and the response to certain points of questioning and a questioning of the norm. Like we see the same sort of visceral reaction to any questioning of the norm. And I think we've gotten to a point now where, questioning the norm has built enough of a bit of a bubble that, we can't, we can't kill people anymore like they used to be able to do, like the church used to be able to do. Just kill people who disagree. That is a massive way that the church expanded. You disagree with us? Dead. Disagree with us? Burn at the stake. You disagree with us? Set you on fire in the street. You disagree with us? Stone you. And that was just the response. There's no logic or rationale behind it. It was just this drive for power and control and this drive for a certainty that doesn't actually exist. So we're just going to mow down anyone who gets in our way until it's beaten into everyone. And then everyone's too afraid for a while to question everything because they're so afraid. It's like there's not even a thought. And so over the years, there's less ability. We've come around in different ways so that there's an environment that does have the capacity to question certain things. And I think that's what we're seeing more recently is just people are more willing. There isn't quite so much maybe external weight in a lot of cases. There's an environment that has the potential to be seen and for this conversation to arise. Kind of like, Earth had the potential for life in some way, shape, or form. This potential has always been there, but it's as it builds, as the potential arises more and more, it's like everything kind of the potential arises more clearly in a sense, and it's always there, but just the willingness to look at it becomes more able to be done in certain environments over others.
I think it's really important to also remember that it's very tempting to vilify and make monsters out of the people who are in those power structures that are actually, benefiting from everybody else kind of toiling underneath this structure that grinds against their life at every turn. And it's really important to remember that they grew up in this system, right? Like they grew up under the impression that this is what they're supposed to do in their specific life and the way that they've grown up in their specific social circle, all of that. Like they're just doing what everybody else is doing. Like it's not like they're trying to be evil. They just assume, well, I lack, everybody lacks. We're all out here trying to get the most that we can. It's just business. You hear that kind of thing, right? But it's important to remember that all of that from the low end to the high end, and I say that kind of tongue in cheek, but from people who are taking advantage to those who are being taken advantage of to greater or lesser degrees, because it's a spectrum, it's all the result of a lack of clarity. All of it. Because if those who were in the upper portions of those power structures were to gain clarity, they would go, oh my God, I'm doing this to myself. And they would recognize where all of their suffering and their need for more and their corruption is coming from, because all of that comes from a deep-seated unhappiness. We forget that. Like we tend to think that people are just happy to be corrupt assholes. No, they got there through a path, right? They got there through a path, and that path is the same path that ultimately any one of us might be tempted to go down if we were offered the opportunity. And so it's just important to remember that the problem isn't the people at the top. The problem is the mentality that created this structure where we have such an imbalance that there is an idea that people can be at the top, that we've stopped being in this together. Right. And that all exists through fear and identity and the need to compare. And over time, it just becomes a way of life. We forget that we made it this way because we lack awareness. We lose our sense of awareness as we get more comfortable. And so it just continues on until finally we have the nerve to question it of necessity. And again, I say of necessity because things are getting so bad now in terms of our ongoing consequence that it's getting obvious something needs to be done. It's just the last thing we want to do, which is be responsible without judging what we've done previously.
Yeah, and that unhappiness that it comes from, it's like if I can't be okay with my situation right now, I got to change it. I got to do things to change it, as opposed to just being willing to let go of the certainty that what's happening right now shouldn't be. And so that unhappiness, that the desire for control, and the atrocities that have happened in the past are just, I'm not comfortable right now. I'm not okay right now. So I have to go do something in order to get there. I don't feel whole right now, so I must have to do something in order to feel more whole, as opposed to not trying to do something and letting go of my assumption about what's happening right now, about what I am in reality right now, as something separate. Like that false certainty kind of leads to everything else, and inevitably has consequences, because as long as you're sure that you're something separate, you're never going to be whole. You're never going to be complete, as long as you're maintaining an idea, or as soon as that, desire to judge how you're doing, and the false certainty. Like, I know how I'm doing right now. Like, I know what's going on right now. No, you don't. No, you don't. You don't know if what you're going through is this objectively terrible thing that is going to last forever and you're never going to come out of. It's like, you don't know that. You don't know what's to come. You don't know what tomorrow is going to bring. You don't know how you're going to feel in 5 seconds. And it doesn't have to feel the same way as you do right now, but you don't know. You just don't know. It's not that you will or you won't, but you don't know. And for a while, we invest in the idea that we do know, and that my perspective of myself is correct, that I know this with absolute certainty. Like, I don't. I really don't. And I never do. I never can. Never will. I never have.
And that's okay.
And that's okay.
And that's okay. That's the point. That's what we're looking for, right? We're looking for somebody either to tell us what the fuck is going on or reassure us that we're going to be okay. And the problem is that we can't know what's going on. And any reassurance that we get that it's going to be okay will only be temporary, because it's not derived from oneself. You'll always need to be reassured until you become the voice itself that's reassuring you. Until you're reminding yourself, like, I'm all right. Right? Not, I know what's going to happen, but I'll deal with it. Right? Until you're the one doing that, it doesn't stick. It doesn't last. Right? And so we all want somebody to come up and go, this is what's happening, and this is what you need to do. And that's the exact opposite of what it is that would set us free and unleash our potential.
Yeah, it's just the willingness to say, I'm going to be okay. Like, I know I'll be okay. I don't need an excuse. I don't need a reason. I don't need someone else to tell me why it's the case, or how I'm wrong. It's like, I don't know what's happening. I can't be sure about this, and that's okay. And I'll be okay. And I'll figure it out. And that's it. It starts and ends with you. Starts and ends with you. All of the shit, all the psychological stuff, basically all of the weight that we take with us is just that idea that, we could do anything incorrectly, and we know that for a fact. Like, you can't. It seems like we can. It seems like I can know that, like, I going through something, and even now, as I'm saying, it seems like I can. I'm having a really difficult time coming up with evidence as to why I feel like I can. Like, it's not really there when you go looking for the evidence of why you think you should be certain. If anything, when you start looking, there's a fuckload of evidence as to why you
That's why
don't
we
know.
don't look. That's why we vilify people who question, and we judge ourselves for not knowing.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, because as soon as you look, it's like, oh shit, that actually doesn't validate my perspective of myself. That means I don't know that for sure. Fuck if I don't know that. Are there other things that I maybe don't know? Oh my god, do I not know anything? Can I not be sure of anything? Can I not be certain about anything? It's like, yes, and that's okay. And there's nothing to run from with that, because you're just running through yourself anyway. And all of those things were actually just weights that were kind of hindering your ability to fully experience what is here and now, to even be involved in what you're doing here and now, where all that false certainty and that investment in thinking that you could know what's going on. Like, you can't. You want to look for evidence, you can, but you're going to find a lot to the contrary, because it's just one perspective that you're holding on to out of infinite numbers. And so whatever evidence you come up with is likely not going to be for the one that you're holding on to. And we just start doing so. Like, how the fuck do we even start? I know it's like a build up, and then it's just a moment to moment desire to keep holding on to it. So we're bringing it into each moment, but like, how the fuck was it? Was it built? I guess it's just false certainties we picked up along the way about how we fit into things or how we're doing.
It's kind of, well, here's the problem, right? Like, because we have this idea of ourselves, it's very difficult for us to do anything without thinking it means something about our value individually, right? And so every time we create something or we come up with something masterful, we're like, humans, we are fucking awesome, right? Rather than, this is reality just expressing itself, right? But we really do. We look at it that way, and we get this false inflated sense of superiority, and it starts to give us this impression that we have control, because look how talented we are, right? And that's it, is that we identify with what we're able to express. That's where the problem comes in, is that we can just express it, right? Doesn't mean anything about you, except that perhaps you had the clarity to express it, but even that doesn't mean anything about you, because that's something that changes over time, and is largely impacted by the clarity of the culture around you. Right? This is something that really that dawned on me at the last retreat. I thought it was really interesting, is that when you look back at Greek sculptures of beautiful people, um, those sculptures aren't of a person. Like, if you think about it, it's not like somebody stood still for 7 or 8 years while this person chipped away at a block. That's not a person that the sculpture is of, and yet it's beautiful. Well, why? Well, because they're expressing the beauty of mankind, not a beautiful person, but how it can be perceived. And that was largely caused by the culture around it. That was very much influenced by the culture around it. And so this is why, when you look at our culture of mass production, straight lines, very little expression, right? Everything's taken very fucking literally, all of that. You really start to look at it and go, wow, we're just stagnating ourselves, because we're not being in a moment where we can appreciate what it is we're going through, appreciate what it is we're experiencing, because we're too busy trying to take fucking credit for it.
Oh my gosh, we're trying to make it mean something about me. Like, how quickly can I make this about me? How quickly can I make this any on any side of that? Like, how quickly can I make that the way that that person looks at me about me mean something about me? It's an incredibly fucking egotistical way of living. I mean, it's on the extreme, and people, trust me, people do not like when you say that thinking about yourself and thinking that other people are thinking about you is incredibly egotistical. But it is, because the alternative is that people aren't thinking about you as much. In fact, they're not thinking about you a fraction of the amount of time you spend thinking about yourself, and you can't really know what they're doing, or even where their responses come from, like why someone responds in a certain way. It could be coming from all different sorts of reasons, something they're trying to make up for in their own life.
I'd go so far as to say that they're not thinking about you ever. Like, and what I mean by that is, because you are not defined by what you do, all they're ever thinking about is what you've done. They're thinking about their interpretation, their assumptions of what you've done. They're not thinking about you. They're thinking about, the impact that you've had on them. They're still thinking about them.
Holy shit. So they're literally never thinking about you. Everyone's always just thinking about themselves and the impact and the interaction as it reflects on them. And it's always variations of that. And their ideas are going to be made up of those assumptions. And above all that, like, you're not a conceptual idea, and so you can't possibly be something that's thought about. And that idea is all over the place, constantly changing. There's not even a you to think about. There's not even a you for someone to consider. It's like they're creating you as they judge you, as they perceive you, as they make an idea. They're creating the conceptual idea as they go, no differently than you're creating the conceptual idea of you as you go, based on your own desire to be certain. And they're doing the same thing about themselves and about everyone they interact with. And it's going to be reflective of them, but there is no you for them to judge that isn't them. The you that they're judging is just them looking at themselves from another perspective. And so it couldn't even be you. You're not something that even can be judged. And it's just
Has anyone
an
ever
idea.
judged you for something that doesn't validate how they want to perceive themselves?
Probably never.
Why would they judge?
Exactly. Why the fuck would they judge if they weren't doing that? It wouldn't make any degree of sense whatsoever. So it's always that. Yeah, man.
We do it all the time, man. And this, again, I say this as a parent. Like, there are so many things that adults judge as pointless in a child's life. Right? Got to get them into school. You got to be learning stuff. Running around in a field playing with a stick can't possibly have value. And yet, all they're doing is learning about their relationship with the here and now, with themselves. And we judge that as having no purpose whatsoever based on what validates us. The fact that I work an 8-hour day and therefore I can't just sit around playing with a fucking stick, so it's got no value. We do it all the time. You know, and that's the whole point. This is what open-mindedness is. It's just not settling on an assumption that's self-validating, that's biased. You know, recognizing that anything you settle on is going to be biased. You know, so just don't. And that's the act of faith that we're talking about all the time. It's faith that not in something. It's just moving forward. This has been a hell of a day. Great conversation. Part 2 of Dualistic Unity Social for today has been a lot of fun. I just want to say thank you to everyone who could join us in the chat section on Instagram and otherwise. If you have a chance, do check out the podcast because we love doing this, but it really is just about connecting with all of you. So it's the Dualistic Unity podcast. You can find us on any podcast platform. We do group chats 5 days a week on Patreon, so you can find us there. But Andrew, man, fucking A, this is great. This has been fun.
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun. Appreciate everyone for tuning in. And yeah, we'll Sunday. We'll see everyone again, chat again, be on episode of Raw at 11:30 Eastern time. So we'll talk to you then and appreciate everyone for tuning in and hope you have a great weekend.
See you soon, everyone.